Coming to the first pattern under behavioral patterns, the first one is chain of responsibility. Under the chain of responsibility, the first template is intent. Coming to the intent of a chain of responsibility is avoid coupling sender of request to its receiver by giving more than one object chance to handle request. Chain receiving objects and pass request along until an object handles it. That means the name itself suggests that the chain of responsibility pattern creates a chain of receiver objects for a request. This pattern decouples sender and receiver of a request based on type of request. This pattern comes under behavioral pattern. Let us see an example for a behavioral. Let us see an example for chain of responsibility pattern. So this is the example for chain of responsibility pattern. See, in this, the sender or a client sends a request to a receiver. It creates a chain of object for a request. Suppose in this, it creates a chain of receiver object for a request. In this pattern, normally each receiver contains reference to the another object. That means whenever a sender sends a request to receiver, while a sender sending a request to receiver, the receiver receives a request from a sender. Let us assume that, let us say that it's a receiver 1. And if the receiver receives the request and it handles the request, suppose if it doesn't handle the request, it will send the request to same request to next receiver, that is, say that, let us assume that it's a receiver 2. Suppose if it also doesn't handle the request, then it gives this request, same request to the receiver 3 until receiver n. While passing the request from receiver 1 to receiver, this receiver consists of reference of a receiver 2, as same as this receiver 2 consists a reference of receiver 3 until receiver n. That means until the request handles a receiver. In this way, the chain of responsibility forms a request from sender to receiver until the request handled by an object. So, coming to the motivation of our pattern. Coming to the motivation of our pattern. In this pattern, we will speak about the problem that has been occurred. In this motivation, the problem here is that the object that ultimately provides the help is not known explicitly to the object. That means in here we are speaking about a button that initiates the help request. What we need is a way to decouple the button that initiates the help request from the object that might provides help information. The chain of responsibility pattern defines how that happens. The idea of this pattern is to decouple senders and receivers by giving multiple objects a chance to handle a request. The request gets passed along a chain of objects until one of them handles it. Let us see an example diagram here drawn for a motivation about printing an application in a sequential order. Printing an application by considering number of objects, sending a request to a final object. See here, the first object in the chain receives the request and either handles it or forwards it to next candidate on the chain, which does like the same way, like this way. The object that made the request has no explicit knowledge of who will handle it. It will say the request has an implicit receiver. It will say that the request has an implicit receiver. That means here we are considering a print button and an OK button. In this we are sending a request to a print dialog box. We don't know how the request has been going on and in which way the request has been handled it. In same way, In that way, the request has been handled and forwarded to a lost object, that means an application object. Here we have to send the request in a sequential order, step by step considering an order. That means first we have to consider request and then we have to pass to next object and then to next object until the object handles the request. So let us see an interaction diagram how that happens. Let us assume the user clicks for help on a button widget marked as a print. The button is contained in an instance of a print dialog box, which knows the application object it belongs to. In this interaction diagram, it illustrates how the request gets forwarded along the chain. In this case, neither a print button or a print dialog handles the request. It stops at an application, which can handle it or ignore it. That means a print dialog box or a print button or a print dialog box, these two will consider the request and it will pass to an application. Either it may handle or not, but it passes the request in a sequential order. The client that issued the request has no direct reference to the object that ultimately fulfilled it. In this, it will forward the request along the chain and to ensure receivers remain implicitly. Each object on the chain shares a common interface. Each object on a chain shares a common interface for handling the request and for accessing it, that we call it as a successor on the chain. Let us see an example for chain of responsibility pattern. In this chain of responsibility pattern, it is combined with the composite patterns. In this scenario, the chain is made up of the least scenarios. In this example, we consider two objects. The first one is composite object, the next one is leaf object. These are the composite objects, these are the leaf objects. Composite objects means that which consists of child, that means root nodes. Leaf object means the final node, that means children that doesn't have no children, without children. The final state, final node is said to be a leaf object. In this scenario, the chain of handler is made up of the list of ancestors of a given leaf. Requests are the leaf level and passed up to the component pattern until they reach the root component. Requests are the leaf level and passed up to the component pattern until they reach the root component. This is the root component. This is the request point. The request has been started at the leaf node and reached until the root component, that means request handled place. In this, requests are started at the leaf node and passed until the composite node. So at first it will start here and it will move from here to here and here to here and then finally here to here. See, from here to, it will pass a request from here to here, this node, this composite object, and from this composite object to and this composite object, and from here to here the final request handling point, that means root component reaches a root component. These are the interfaces act between one node to another node. So in this way the request will be handled.